looking at investing in real estate. The dilemma is, shall you go commercial or shall you go residential? There are many factors to consider for the real estate investor when comparing commercial and residential real estate investing. Commercial tenants are usually of a business nature, running a business from a property, whilst residential tenancies is generally for living accommodation. Commercial real estate investment has a perception of being expensive and unaffordable. This could probably be defined as half right. We always hear of significant commercial property transactions, examples being large retail shopping centres, international hotels and office towers. Most people have a good understanding of residential property, as most of us have owned or currently own a single family residential property. So we feel safe in investing in residential property.
Bank finance for residential and commercial real estate rental property. Bank lending is usually easier for residential real estate investing. Generally, banks require smaller deposits when people are purchasing residential property. Deposits could be as low as 10%, while around 30% or higher with commercial property. With the current situation of the changes in lending policies, finance has become more complicated and high deposits are usually required. Up till recently, interest-only loans have become popular. This is changing with the new lending requirements. This means that the payments and possible interest rates are also higher. You may be asked to prove a higher income and a strong long-term cash flow to service a debt. What is the general rate of return on commercial and residential types of investments? Generally, investing in commercial rental property has higher income returns, or cap rates, compared to residential property investing. When journalists quote income returns for residential property, they usually quote a gross income figure. With commercial property, outgoings are traditionally paid by tenants, while residential owners typically have to pay most outgoings. A gross income figure is the actual rent paid by the tenant to the landlord. When negotiating commercial leases, the tenant negotiates a net rent plus a percentage of the outgoings. For example, if they lease 10% of the building, they would usually be liable to pay 10% of the total outgoings. With a residential situation, tenants usually pay for all their water usage on top of their basic utilities such as electricity, gas, and telephone. Cash flow returns on investment vary. At the moment, rental returns for residential are around the 3 to 4% mark gross. This equates to about 2 to 3% net. On the other hand, good quality commercial property with blue chip tenants with a reliable property manager, e.g. national tenant, in a prime retail space in major cities of Australia, is currently showing around the 4 to 6% mark net. In some situations, the property could show a lower rate of return where the current rent is below market value or the site is potentially a significant development site. Question is, how do you work out a commercial and residential investment property value? Cap rate method. The most common method of valuing commercial real estate investments are by their cap rate. The cap rate is a cash flow return on the price of the property. For example, let's say you are looking to buy a commercial office with a current annual rental return of $150,000 per year. You observe that similar quality offices in a similar area are selling for 5% cap rate or net yield. Taking this into account, you would estimate a fair market price of $3 million. Residential properties are usually compared on a gross rental, which includes outgoings. Other methods can include direct comparison. The direct comparison method is where properties compared like for like. For example, if a similar property was sold for the same price, when taking all things like position, build quality, land size into account. Replacement value. The replacement method takes into account the cost to rebuild the structure. This is separated from the value of the land. An example would be a house or commercial property with $1 million to build on a block of land valued at $1.2 million. The estimated value would be $2.2 million. You would then have to take into account the depreciation. Highest and best use. Some properties can be underutilized. You may have a property with a low yield or cap rate, which is rezoned for higher use. For example, it may be rezoned for a block of units or a high-rise commercial building. But how much can a landlord increase my rent? Commercial real estate leases usually have annual increases. From our recent transactions, we would estimate that around 80 to 90% of commercial leases have yearly increases of 3% or CPI, Consumer Price Index, while the balance of 10 to 20% of contracts being either 4% or 5% annual increases or a combination of CPI plus 1 or 2%. These higher increases are more common in major shopping centres. We have also noticed that some commercial, non-retail commercial leases can have increases in the higher of CPI or fixed rise. This would normally be there to protect landlords from a low CPI increase. Some lease contracts have clauses that the rental can be subject to market review at the option period. In most cases, this can protect both the lessor and lessee from significant fluctuations in rental market conditions. Residential rents are usually reasonably stable with less frequent increases. Most changes in rent paid are negotiated with new lease contracts. Property leasing periods. Generally speaking, when comparing both types of investments in a regular market, it is usually easier to lease out a residential rental property than a commercial one. Depending on the current situation, residential properties only take a few weeks to lease. On the other hand, during unfavorable economic conditions, some commercial properties can take many months to lease out. Commercial investment property usually has more extended leasing periods. Most residential leases are around 12 months, while commercial contracts are generally 4 to 10 years and sometimes longer. So residential investments typically have more regular downtimes, while commercial ventures have less and more extended downtimes between tenants. What type of investment property show higher capital gains? Generally, not always, capital gains are higher with residential property. In the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen spectacular capital growth in residential property in Sydney and Melbourne. In fact, this trend has been reflected in many major capital cities and regions throughout the world. Generally speaking, residential property demand usually increases with population growth. On the other hand, commercial investment property prices are often a reflection of the current business environment and structure of lease. For example, a longer leasing period may indicate more stability in investment. Although capital gains for commercial property are usually lower, some commercial properties can achieve spectacular capital gains. Some of these factors could also be local population increases, change of use, redevelopment, or zoning changes. Also, some commercial property investments do have residential tenants. For example, this could be a boarding house, which in theory is like a mini block of units.
In summary, when considering real estate investments, How you decide to buy between commercial and residential real estate will take into account many items. It all boils down to your financial situation and your long and short-term investment property strategy. Like to discuss this further? Feel free to contact me, Citas from CST Properties. Our contact information are with this video.